Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Heather. In his first meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said his country had concerns about U.S. approach to Iran on the nuclear deal, but promised a less confrontational approach on the issue. Earlier, on 21st June, the new Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, a hardliner, slammed Iran's newly elected president and called on world powers to, and I quote from what he said, wake up to the perils of returning to a nuclear agreement with Tehran. Lapid and Bennett, who put together a coalition of different ideological shades to oust former right-wing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, however, continue the line Israel has always on the Iran nuclear deal. Former U.S. President Donald Trump had walked out of the deal in 2018 and adopted a maximum pressure policy through a web of primary and secondary sanctions against Iran. Joe Biden's administration wants to return to the deal and is conducting indirect talks with Iranian negotiators in Vienna through other parties to the deal. Just before leaving office, former Mossad chief Yossi Cohen, in a widely reported interview, gave hints about his agency's role in destroying part of Natanz facility, the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, and the warning to Iranian scientists. It does not appear that Israel is about to change policy, though it has to deal with the new administration in the U.S. and also rising criticism of Israel among Democrats in the United States. In the meeting with Blinken, Lapid said that mistakes were made in the past and regretted that once robust bipartisan support for Israel in the United States had dissipated. To discuss whether Israel is a help or a hindrance to the U.S. policy on Iran, I'm joined by Dr. Devine, Associate Professor at the Department of Politics and International Relations at Mount Allison University, Kourosh Shamlou, a lawyer and managing partner at Shamlou Law in Paris, and Pierluigi Paganini, a member of the European Union Agency for Network and Information Security, Threat Landscape Stakeholder Group, and Cyber G7 Group. Let me begin with Professor Devine here. Professor Devine, let's start with the basic question of right now. And I ask this question because a number of analysts in the United States have talked about this. Is Israel or the Israeli policies towards Iran and in the greater Middle East a help or a hindrance to the U.S. policy on Iran and the greater Middle East?
Well, at this point right now, there's a big divergence between what Israel and the United States want. If we're looking at things in the bigger picture, the U.S. still sees Israel as an extremely important strategic ally and as a help. But on this particular issue, at this particular time, their policies are diverging. And what it really comes down to is for the U.S., getting a deal or getting the JCPOA back up and running is how they see their strategic interests being defined in the region, or for the Israelis, it's the exact opposite. So there's certainly a strain between the two of them on this particular issue. And the question is going to be to what extent they can coordinate their policies, and if they cannot coordinate their policies, which they probably won't be able to do, at the very least minimize the damage it's going to do to their bilateral relationship.
Right. Now, the outgone Prime Minister Netanyahu, on the day that the new Mossad chief, David Barnea, was, sworn in, he spoke at that ceremony, and he went to the extent of saying that if Israel has to make a choice between supporting the U.S. policy on Iran or confronting the Islamic Republic, it will choose the latter because Iran is an existential threat. And at the end of the day, an existential threat is the greatest threat to Israel. So my question is, Naftali Bennett, who's now the Prime Minister, as you know, has had a long association with Netanyahu, was Netanyahu's protege, chief of staff at one point, until, they fell out and the rest of it. But he is, in some ways, even more hardline compared to Netanyahu. And Bennett, who's a centrist, possibly could be, a more positive influence. But do you think that at the end of the day, is going to be the same policy strand as far as the existential threat part of it is concerned?
I think the new incoming Israeli government still sees Iran from the same perspective that the Netanyahu government did. The big difference really is going to be where they separate from the United States. How much are they going to be able to willing to work with the Americans and to try and influence them? And if anything, the real difference, I would say, is that the Bennett government and Mr. Lapid have criticized Netanyahu for not being able to influence the Americans when they were negotiating with Iran in 2015. So their approach has been to try and work with the Americans to have some sort of influence over the way a deal would be constructed, perhaps in terms of changing timeframes, perhaps in terms of changing what particular sanctions would be lifted, and most importantly, trying to get other issues on the agenda, things like ballistic missiles, perhaps drones, support for militias in the rest of the region. So rather than just abandon the United States, they think that they can shape American policy by trying to work more closely with them.
Right.
But it's the same basic approach, the same ends they want.
Absolutely. So another issue is Israel obviously has avoided taking a direct approach in terms of trying to destroy the Iranian nuclear capability. It's not the same thing what they did in Iraq or what they currently do in Syria every time they feel a threat. So, but short of that, they have taken other measures. They have penetrated the Iranian security services. We just saw what happened at Natanz. Earlier, through the cyber capabilities in collaboration with the United States, that Stuxnet attack, and of course, the killing of Iranian scientists. So do you think that as far as those covert activities are concerned, regardless of where the US and the Iran nuclear deal goes, Israel will keep at it?
Until there will be a point where Iran crosses what Israel considers to be a red line in terms of its nuclear program. But right up until that point, they will continue to use these covert methods, whether it's cyber attacks or assassinations or other types of sabotage, to try and slow down the Iranian program. Now, not only are they trying to slow down the Iranians, they're also trying to send signals to both Iran and to the United States, telling the Americans in particular that that whatever the Americans want to do, Israel has its own policies and that they're going to pursue them, and signaling to the Iranians that there's a limit to how much they're going to be willing to take, and warning the Iranians not to cross that line. And in fact, with the outgoing head of the Mossad, who was very close to Benjamin Netanyahu, when he was leaving and telling all of these stories about what Israel had done in Iran, he made it very explicit that he was saying to the Iranians that Israel sees you, they know what you're doing, and that they will react. So it's definitely about sending messages as well as slowing down and sabotaging the program.
Absolutely. That's a great point, because, we did a program then when that interview was broadcast, and it was very clear that given the Israeli censors with reference to any talk of, issues of national security, it was very clear that it could not have gone through the censors without actually the government wanting that kind of signaling to Iran. But stay with me, Professor Devine. Let me pull in Pierluigi on this with reference to the cyber side of it. Now, Pierluigi, we know that Stuxnet attack and all that. But we also know that since then, Iran has developed it's really worked at fever pitch, trying to develop counter, capabilities, its own cyber offensive capabilities. So, what are the possibilities in that, in that digital sort of, environment of the Israelis and the Iranians slugging it out?
In the Middle East area, we are observing an intense activity associated with threat actors from Iran. Over the years, Iran-linked cyber espionage groups have improved their cyber capabilities and carry out a growing number of cyber espionage campaigns aimed at Western organizations and university. We also attribute to Iran-linked APT groups sabotage activities against critical infrastructure in the area. Let me think, for example, at water facility, ports that are considered the primary targets of Iranian state-sponsored hackers. Clearly, if you ask me what will be the next future, I believe that we will see a growing number of cyber operations aimed at gathering intelligence about relationships about the states in the area. Consider, for example, that Russia, Syria, Iraq, and Turkey congratulate the new President Raisi. So it's very important also for Western intelligence to gather any kind of information. So I believe that we will assist to a growing number of cyber espionage campaigns in order to gather intelligence.
Right. So you also write on these issues, and you obviously have statistics. How many attacks have the Iranians mounted against the Israeli infrastructure or companies?
Consider that such kind of attacks it's very noisy, and usually we have the information that have been shared by the Israeli government. Anyway, we have confidence. We have information about attacks against water facility. None of these attacks has created serious damages, but we cannot underestimate the growing capability of Iran-linked threat actors. We also know that the Iranian state-sponsored hackers are increasing their capability in order to develop specific malware that could address specific vulnerabilities that are, let me say, affecting systems like SCADA systems that are used in critical infrastructure. And regarding the statistics, we have no specific statistics, but we have only specific cases under analysis. These cases are related to water facilities attacks mainly, and we have also some attacks against some ports in the Middle East. And all these attacks were, let me say, focused on sabotage activities. In some cases, threat actors used what we call wiper. Wiper are specific malware that are able to completely wipe the machine in order to destroy the operations of the specific infrastructure. So let me conclude saying you that I believe that we will see a growing number of these attacks in the future. So it's important to rise up the level of attention of any operator of critical infrastructure in the area.
And one final question, Pierluigi. Can it reach a point where such a cyber attack results in such massive physical damage to a facility or to infrastructure that it could become a cause for conflict?
It's very, your question is very complex because you are right. Such kind of attacks could cause serious damages. They can cause a loss of human lives. They create destruction in specific area, and the impact of such kind of destruction could be extended to other countries in the area. Another aspect that we have to consider, and we cannot underestimate these issues, that other governments worldwide could be interested in creating tension in the Middle East. So I believe that we will assist also to cyber espionage campaigns that will be carried out by third-party governments that could use also fast flag, let me say fast flag operation, in order to raise the tensions between, for example, Israel and Iran, between Iran and the US. And I believe that probably many states, Russia, China, and other states like North Korea could be interested in raise the level of tension in the area. So it's very dangerous.
Right. That's a pretty bleak picture, but thank you so much. That was Pierluigi Paganini speaking with us. Let me pull in Mr. Shamlou here. Mr. Shamlou, what do you think are the options that Iran can exercise. We know, and I think you were on my program once when we were talking in the run-up to the presidential elections. You're talking about a lot of criticism within Iran, which was directed at the new president, Mr. Raisi. So give us a sense of how effective Mr. Raisi is going to be and Iran's options as the talks unfold in Vienna.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, as I said the last time, Raisi, now that he has been elected, he has a lot of power. He controls the National Assembly, the Congress, and all the conservative. Iran is controlled by the ultra-conservative people, the Revolutionary Guard, the Supreme Guard, which is behind Mr. Raisi. And Mr. Raisi said many times that he wants to go and sign the New Deal with the Americans, because he knows that the economy of Iran needs that agreement to be signed in order for the sanctions to be lifted, because Iran's economy is in a collapse, and people in Iran want jobs. They want to be able to purchase things because prices are rising every day. So he said many times that he's going to sign that deal, but not at any cost. He will sign a deal, going back to the 2015 deal. He doesn't want the ballistic weapons to be inside that deal. And Mr. Raisi now has a lot of power, and he's asking Rouhani to wait, not to sign any deal. They don't want Rouhani to sign that deal, and they want the Raisi to sign that deal. The options for the Iranians are, I think they have only one option at this moment. They have to sign a new deal, because the Iranian economy is in collapse. If they don't sign a deal, we have 20% unemployment in Iran.
So, Mr. Shamlou, let me interject here. So you're saying that the negotiating positions that Iran is taking in Vienna, some of those are maximalist positions. We also know that there is clean text on some of the issues, like Iranian oil and the rest of it. But you're saying that Iran is playing tough, even though Iran does not have any option other than to sign the deal.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Iran doesn't have a lot of options. There are two options left. If Iran wants to sign the deal, as I said, because the prices are going up 40%, the inflation is 40%, so the economy cannot survive that. So Iran has two options. It's either to sign the deal or to go directly and try to get the nuclear weapon. And the Americans, the Europeans know that if they don't sign an agreement with Iran is going to enrich uranium more and more, and there's going to get at one point that Iran will be close to getting that nuclear bomb. So for the American, it's going to be either to attack Iran, to start a war with Iran, or to negotiate. And the Iranians, especially Raisi, knows that. And now that he has all the powers, he wants to be in control of signing this deal. And he knows that Americans are, let's say, tight a bit. And he knows that the Israelis are working behind the doors privately with the Republicans, with the Democrats, and they're going to try to topple that deal, as Netanyahu tried to do. And as you said, the new prime minister and the foreign minister have the same position, but they will do it quietly and not in front of the camera as Netanyahu used to do.
Right. Now, this is a very important point. I'm going to return to you, Mr. Shamlou, with another question, but let me pull in Professor Devine here on this. So, Professor Devine, what do you think of the second option, that if this thing sort of unravels, then Iran says, okay, let's go for the nuclear weapons option. Let's go to, enriching uranium to weapons grade. If that happens, and it's a big if, because Iran has constantly said that it doesn't want to do that, but if that happens, is that the point where the US and Israeli positions converge in terms of how to proceed further with Iran?
If that happens, that is getting to the point where, yes, Iran will be crossing a red line for both the U.S. and the Israelis. It's important to keep in mind that there are some nuances to those options. Iran may enrich almost to the point where it has a weapon and stay short of that. As I said, there's a lot of signaling going on. Iran may figure out where that line is and come right up to the edge of it as a way of putting pressure on the international community. Whether Iran is going to go past that line and develop a weapon is a different question altogether, and it has the strategic calculations taking place in Tehran are going to be more complicated. If they do cross that line and they do develop a weapon, they know they'll be inviting an attack. So at that point, it's a very dangerous gamble for the Iranians. In some ways, it may be better for them to come close but stop. On top of that, I mean, if they do have a nuclear weapon or they're very, very close to it, the relationship with some of their proxies may change. It may embolden groups like Hezbollah or Islamic Jihad in Palestine. These are things that the Iranians would be concerned about because they don't want to get dragged into a crisis once they're a nuclear state. So getting a nuclear weapon for Iran would be a very dangerous thing. I'm not convinced that that's actually the direction they want to go.
Right. No, yes, we kind of looking at different scenarios. So when you say that they might, if it comes to that, they might go just to the edge of it and not keel over. Now, if that happens, I'm assuming then they would be banking on the fact that there will be people in the United States saying, no, well, let's go for, a conflict. Others will say, no, they're still short of that. So in a way, Iran would then be sort of calculating that probably remaining short of that is going to be a negotiating position rather than an invitation to a conflict. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, I think that's exactly what the likely scenario is. They would try and figure out where that point is, and expect that there will be some discussion or some differences of opinion in the United States in particular about how to respond and whether it is worth getting into a war with Iran in the Middle East over this. Especially if they don't actually have a weapon. And if you notice carefully, Joe Biden has been very explicit in saying Iran will not get a weapon on its watch. But that falls short of saying, they will not get the capacity to build a weapon, but fall short. So, this is something also with the Americans, even with Donald Trump, where he had multiple opportunities to go into a conflict with Iran, and he backed off. So this is something that the Iranians are going to be looking at too, that the United States really doesn't have an appetite for another large-scale war in the Middle East.
Absolutely. But one final question, Professor Devine. We said that if Iran crosses a red line, that's probably where the US and Israeli positions will converge. However, if Iran just goes right up to the edge of it, I'm assuming that while the US would think, okay, this is a point where we have to negotiate or renegotiate, I'm assuming that Tel Aviv would say, no, this is a point where we have to do something. And they would probably do something even in opposition to the US. Is that a likely scenario?
It's possible. It's possible. Israel and the United States will probably have different red lines in terms of the Iranian enrichment program. So it's possible that the Israelis will want to strike before the Americans. And it's going to be a question of really whether Iran can read the signals correctly and accurately. And that's probably the biggest threat here. I don't think any of the parties want to get into a direct war, except for a few hardliners on either side. But the real problem is going to be miscalculation. Is Iran going to miscalculate where those red lines are? Are the Americans or the Israelis going to, or even the Iranians, going to miscalculate the impact of cyber attacks or other types of covert attacks and sabotage? Is somebody going to make a mistake which is going to spiral out of control?
Absolutely. It's all about calculation. Thank you so much. That was Professor James Devine. Pleasure speaking with you, sir. Let me go back to Mr. Shamlou. Mr. Shamlou, you talked about the Iranian economic situation, which obviously is a matter of grave concern, not just to the government, but to the common citizens of Iran. You also know that there's been a debate on the Financial Action Task Force. Apparently, there was a bill in the Majlis which has been gathering dust there. Now, Iran will also, in addition to this, have to, become a part of possibly the Asia-Pacific group and come under the FATF regime if it really wants to enter the financial stream, the global financial stream. So give us a sense of where that might go.
So Iran, first of all, in order for Iran to come within the financial world, it needs to negotiate with the Americans for them to lift the sanction on the banking system, on the financial system. Now, the Iranians, the Iranian banks, the Iranian financial sector cannot do much. They're negotiating, they're doing trade with China, with India, with Russia, but they have a lot of problems in order to trade. What Iran wants, first of all, is for the Americans, or let's say for the world, to lift the sanctions on their financial system so they can become part of the world financial system, so they can sell their oil, so they can export their oil and be able to get that money within Iran to invest in Iran. So Iran is is getting close to China, because if they cannot have an agreement with the Americans, they know that China is their only resource. And
we're basically looking at the possibility of an agreement. But my question was that lifting of sanctions and the rest of it would still require Iran, if it wants to enter the global financial stream, to actually agree to be part of the FATF regime. I mean, there was a bill in the Majlis, there was debate in Iran. I don't really know where it stands.
I don't know. As you said, the Majlis, they want that system to be within the financial system. Iran has a lot of problems financially, economically. They don't actually know what to do. Now that Raisi is the president with controlling the Majlis, they will try to fix that in order, first of all, for Iran to be part of the financial system and for them to be able to work and even send their money outside and try to do business with the rest of the world.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Kourosh Shamlou speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss a new viral variant of the coronavirus, Delta Plus, which was identified in India on 11th June and recently classified as a variant of concern. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. After the Delta variant, the name given to what was originally called the Indian variant of coronavirus, India has detected another viral variant of the coronavirus, Delta Plus. It was identified on 11th June and has been classified as a variant of concern. According to initial reports, the Delta Plus variant has greater affinity to lung tissues as compared to other strains, but that may not mean that it will cause severe disease or is more transmissible. We do know that the Delta variant is highly transmissible, and several countries are battling new waves of the variant. Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia, Russia, and countries in South America are dealing with the Delta variant breakouts. The World Health Organization has declared it the most contagious of all coronavirus variants. It has now been identified in 85 countries. So what exactly are we looking at with reference to Delta Plus is what we're going to discuss this evening. I'm joined by Dr. Derya Unutmaz. Dr. Unutmaz is Professor of Immunology at the Jackson Laboratory for Genomic Medicine, and Dr. Anant Bhan. Dr. Bhan is a medical doctor and a researcher in the fields of global health, health policy, and bioethics. Let me begin with Dr. Bhan here. Dr. Bhan, so Delta and now Delta Plus. So what are we looking at? Is it a matter of concern now? And is it called plus because it's likely to be worse, or it's simply called plus because there is a delta, and just to sort of distinguish from delta, it's called Delta Plus?
That's a good question. As you were rightly pointing out, the Delta variant is what we've been worried about for a few months, including in India and globally. In fact, the Delta variant could have been a major causative factor in the so-called second wave in India, which was really intense, and we have discussed that on your program earlier as well. Now that cases are going down, genomic surveillance has revealed the Delta Plus variant, and what the Delta Plus variant has is an additional mutation, which is the K417N mutation, as compared to the Delta variant. Now, there are relatively few cases so far in India, but it's already been identified in at least 12 states in India, though the number of cases remains low. But as we have seen in the past, we need to keep a close watch. What we know so far is the Delta variant by itself certainly is much more transmissible. And so it's likely that the Delta Plus variant is as well. But between the Delta and Delta Plus variant, it doesn't seem to be there is any significant difference from what we know so far. So hence, in simpler words, we don't think, based on what we know so far, that Delta Plus is more transmissible than the Delta variant. That having been said, these are early days. We need to do more studies. We need to do more public health tracking to figure out if there is anything additionally to worry about in terms of what we know. Again, this discovery tells us the importance of continuing to vaccinate as fast as possible, continuing to use public health measures like masking, and also that we need to keep testing and doing genomic surveillance so that we are able to identify these kind of variants early and then institute response measures.
Absolutely. So, obviously, lots of lessons clearly must have been learned through the second wave, where, as we discussed on this program with you also and with other experts, there was a lot of criticism of the government by health experts. So is the institutional response now to genomic testing, to tracking, and generally whatever needs to be done with reference to the healthcare system, is it showing signs of improvement at the state level? Whether the public hospitals or the private hospitals, what is the scenario like now in India?
Yeah, it is the case that I think twice bitten, now shy, and many health systems, especially at the state level, are recognizing the need for more preparedness. So already there has been a lot of talk about what would be a potential third wave like, and who would it involve. Some people say it might involve children more, others differ from that. But it is true that there has been efforts made to try to anticipate the need for more infrastructure, specifically for populations and at health facilities. An important part of that, of course, is the vaccination strategy. And I think India is certainly getting now more aggressive with plans for vaccination. Earlier, of course, we were running one of the larger vaccination programs in the world. But I think given the population size, it was always going to be challenged to get adequate coverage. And I think that's now been recognized by both the central and the state governments, and there are efforts to try to enhance coverage across age groups, at least in those above 18. The other part is, yes, genomic surveillance, and I think there are now more labs being added to the network. This is a specialized science, so it's not that every lab can perform genomic surveillance, but it is also important to have that infrastructure. More and more labs are now being added to the network, and hopefully over the next few months, we will have an ability to test more and identify these kind of variants early enough for local control measures to be started.
Absolutely, that's news. Let me pull in Professor Unutmaz. Professor Unutmaz, almost literally, you and I have been on this program with the beginning of this pandemic. We've been kind of tracking it, and we've looked at it from various angles. So this evening, what do you think are the pluses that we have accumulated globally, and what are the areas of concern that we need to be concerned about even now?
So let me start with the concerns first. I think one of the major concerns have been the the human behavior have not significantly changed from the beginning of the pandemic. And I think all these mutations are as a result of that. The virus obviously tries to get more fitter. I mean, it's trying to survive and transmit itself better and better. And I suspect that it has reached the peak. Delta or Delta Plus, whatever it is probably it's as good as it gets point. But I think the transmission and the widespread infection rate allow this to happen. That's the bad part, and it's partly also because people are really fed up. I mean, it's a huge trauma, economic, sociological, psychological, and so on. But the good part is that we're really winning this war. Despite all this Delta variant talk, the vaccines are highly effective. In particular, they're very effective in preventing the severe disease and death. For example, you can see, in England, in UK, the cases are increasing. Yesterday there was 22,000 cases, but when you look at hospitalization and deaths, it's less than a dozen. So clearly the vaccines are working, and actually most of those cases are either unvaccinated or single dose or AstraZeneca. BioNTech and Moderna vaccines are super effective. You don't even see much cases happening, maybe asymptomatic. So as the world ramps up this vaccination, we're going to cut the speed of this virus. And as pointed out by Professor Anant, India, for example, has really been lagging on vaccination, despite the fact that they've been producing a lot of vaccines. But lately, they're doing about 5-6 million doses a day. If they can increase that further, I think we're going to get ahead of this virus. So that's my positive note.
Right. Quickly, before I back to Anant Bhan, there's also the issue of the vaccine politics. For instance, there are countries that are only allowing people in who have got specific brands of vaccines, and so it's kind of reached a point where lots of people and economic activity is being shut out because somehow, let's say the United States doesn't like Sinopharm or Sputnik. In order, and you talked about us winning this war through vaccination. At some point, could there possibly be a system where we can get rid of the vaccine politics and understand that all these vaccines are effective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the vaccines, there's a primary goal and there's a secondary goal. The primary goal is to really reduce the severity of disease and death. That's what the vaccines usually are for. But the secondary goal is to reach so-called herd immunity, so that the vaccinated people do not spread the infection to other people. And the first point, the primary goal, I think, is being achieved by almost all vaccines in market right now. So they all have an effect on reducing mortality and severe disease. But unfortunately, for the secondary point, some vaccines are much better. So mRNA vaccines not only prevent infection, but they also prevent spread of the infection. So that makes it more appealing for certain countries, that if you have certain vaccines, that your risk of bringing virus to that country is much less versus other vaccines. But your point is very well taken. I think we need to get away from this vaccination point, because there are people who had COVID who have fantastic immunity. They don't even need to be vaccinated. So maybe we need some sort of an antibody test that can really correlate immune correlated protection, so that, despite of the vaccine, what you got, you really should be considered non-infectious. I don't have an easy answer to that, but clearly we need a better system than playing politics with this.
Right. So before I wrap, let me go back to Dr. Anant Bhan. Dr. Bhan, anything you want to add with reference to what Professor Unutmaz said? Do you also believe that we are winning this war against this pathogen? And secondly, a word about, since you also research the fields of global health, this issue about vaccine politics.
Yeah, just so both issues are important. Of course, I think we are in a much better situation now because we have vaccines and we know that vaccines work, the mRNA vaccines, the other forms of vaccines. We have more vaccines now in the fray as well. So I think that's certainly a big positive. I think lessons have been learned over the last 1.5 years. We know better how to handle and treat the viral disease. But that having been said, I think the issue which is linked to the politics, the larger problem of inequity still is something that should worry us. This is what is fundamentally a justice issue in global health, that there are many rich countries which have managed to vaccinate a significant proportion of their population, and there are many low and middle income countries where even the frontline health workers have not yet accessed the vaccine, or at least in a significant amount. And this, of course, tells us that we have all of these international institutions, but we don't have enabling mechanisms for access for many of these countries. And because production is often focused in only a few countries, we are facing a crisis situation. And at the heart of the matter, this pandemic tells us that we are all protected when everyone is protected. It is not like any country can just keep itself into a cocoon and feel that just by vaccinating all of its population, it's going to keep itself protected. New variants will come, new forms of viral diseases will come, and the more we cooperate with each other and the more there is solidarity and support for each other, I think the better prepared and protected the entire world will be. So I think that is one key lesson we should certainly be focusing more of our discussions and quite honestly diplomacy on.
Absolutely. So cooperation key to it. But very quickly back to Professor Unutmaz. Professor Unutmaz, there was also, when this pandemic started, there was a lot of skepticism about how fast we could come up with a vaccine and then the rollout. So, previously it was considered that vaccine development takes about 7 to 8 years. So has something happened this time? Is there a positive development which tells us, which also might have an impact on how we develop vaccines for any other pathogens down the line? Something that we have done, in something which is new and we have done and which is going to be useful for the entire idea of developing vaccines in the future?
I completely agree that it's going to have a major impact because I think we were overly protective or overly defensive, so to speak, in terms of vaccine development. I mean, vaccines, really what they do is to educate your immune system, and whatever the side effects you're going to see are going to happen within weeks or months. There's no possibility of having a long-term or years later side effects. I mean, the vaccines does not stay in your body. So I think there was such an emergency that before we didn't really have to deal with this kind of a situation, and I think the vaccine development was too relaxed. So the world really realized that wow, we can really develop vaccines so much faster, and the production can ramp up so much quicker. So this will have a major impact for future pandemics or other future vaccine development. In such a short time, we have already had 3 billion doses applied over the world. I mean, this is an incredible amount of vaccine production, and I mean, you're seeing the effects. Millions of lives have been saved. So clearly, we have to adapt these technologies and move very fast in the future as well.
Thank you. Thank you to Professor Unutmaz. Thank you to Dr. Anant Bhan. This is all from In Focus this evening. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.